Good day, everybody. Welcome to today's video. Today's video, I am going to do a injection pump on a Perkins motor and a Manitou M50 turbo forklift. And this is quite the large job. One of the first things I did is had to remove the top cover to get better access. And then in the previous video, I talked about I couldn't find a lift pump. Right now, what you're looking at is the lift pump and fuel filter. So I was able to verify with pulling the fuel line off and turning the key on that the lift pump did indeed pump fuel, but no fuel was getting up to the injectors. Next thing I did was start moving part of the cowling in the back. Have to get that radiator out. One of the things I found was working on this forklift are things are extremely tight, and there's little access holes in the frame to get at bolts and stuff, which really makes this a real pain in the butt. And they can just get a look at what I'm doing here. Start removing covers, start pulling off a little bit of wiring, a little bit of hosing. Right there, I took the weight off to get better access to the back, and also when I start to time the gears. And the weight was only held on by 4 bolts. It wasn't a big deal at all. Once I finally got the radiator loose enough, I craned that out of place, and now it gives me better access. Remove the fan and water pump, and now I'm looking at the timing cover, which is pretty simple, just a few bolts there to remove it. So the timing cover's off, and I need to rotate the motor, and I don't have a barring tool, so I put some bolts in the crank pulley and started cranking it over by hand with a pry bar, which is kind of a pain in the butt. But on the gears themselves, there's marks. You need to get these marks lined up. So you can see right there, those marks were close, but they're not quite. And I'm not sure how many rotations you need to do, but you got to crank it over quite a bit to get the timing marks to line up perfectly. So as you can see right there, still not quite in place. And I'm just showing you how I'm barring it over. It takes a little bit of strength to crank it over on the compression stroke. And there you have it right there. The timing marks for the injection pump are lined up right now. So now at this point, I can lock the injection pump and then get ready to pull it off. And you can see behind the pulley there is 3 bolts there for the injection pump. And you can see the injection pump's kind of buried in there. I still got a few things I got to remove. There's a bunch of fuel lines, injection lines, and everything, of course, in this thing is all metric, which makes it a little bit fun. So you just keep on seeing kind of the overview on what I have to deal with here. So basically you gotta have to make a plan, because everything's got to come out in sections first, because everything has its own spot and there's only certain ways that it can go in. So I started to remove the fuel line. The fuel line clips are pretty simple. You just push them in, pull them off. I got the fuel lines removed off the lift pump, and I thought for sure at first I need to label them, but they're actually different lines. So you don't have to worry about mixing them up. You actually don't have to worry about mixing up any lines at all, to be honest, because there's only one way that they could possibly go. So lift pump is out. I removed it because you need to remove it to pull the injection pump out. And now there's a few more lines. I got the injection lines up top there, and just kind of looking over things. So here's the injection pump with all the lines pulled up and off and out of the way. Now when I took that main fuel line and flipped it up, the rubber hose that was leading to the injection pump, I believe it's the return line, it actually cracked by doing it because it was so rotten. So that line actually needed to be replaced, and it's quite expensive. So there's a better look at it. I need to get those injection lines off the back. So there's 4 right there, and they come up. So once you remove everything, the injection lines are pretty easy to get off. So the injection lines are out. I just put some cloth over top of the injectors to help prevent getting dirt and stuff in. And you can see it at the back. I'm not worried about plugging up the injection pump because it's shot anyways. But in the middle of the injection pump in the lower, there's a bolt there, and there's a lock that you need to lock it when you pull it out. Probably not for the old one, but there's a better view of that lock right there. You back it off and you push that metal metal plate up or down to either lock it or unlock it. In my case, for practice, I just locked it for the removal purposes. Now, the one tip I can give you for removing the injection pump gear is when you use a gear puller and you remove the nut, is put some pressure on it and then use an air hammer on the gear and it'll just pop right off. I promise you it will do that, because if you put pressure on it, it's not going to go. It's a tapered fit. So an air hammer, one hit, boom, it goes flying off. So now it's off, and you can get a better view of those 3 bolts. Now I can remove those 3 bolts and then pull that injection pump off. So there's my air hammer right there that I just showed you. This makes it way easier. So I just pulled the injection pump out, and there's an O-ring that goes on the face. You got to remember that to put that in on the new one. And then this is the time you go over and start cleaning up stuff, going over things, and then try to remember how everything went back together. There's lots of other small things I didn't show, like removing the throttle cable spring and all that stuff, but I'm just kind of showing you now how it looks without everything in there. Because if you ever have to do this job, this is actually a pretty big job. And there's the old injection pump on the table. There's the new one. Having a look and see what parts I need to transfer over from the old one to the new one. The injection pump comes timed, so you got to make sure you don't screw that up. Because if you get your timing out, there's a special tool that you can buy to retime it, and it's pretty expensive, so you don't want to screw that up. So I just want to show you the gear there. It is tapered, so there's only one way that it can go on. Well, obviously with the timing marks, you can't screw that up. The funny thing is, the shaft is keyed, but the gear is not keyed. So you got to pay attention to that. Make sure you don't screw it up. So now the injection pump is put in, bolted down. I can put that timing gear back in, and make sure to line up your timing marks before you bolt it down. Now I'm starting to put some of the lines back on it. Now this is very important. Once the injection pump is put in and everything's bolted down, you need to remember to unlock it. So at this point of the video, I basically just assembling everything, because if you can take it apart, hopefully you should be able to put it back together. And for the water pump seal or cover, I just used the old gasket and silicone, but everything else I got a brand new gasket for it, and so far it hasn't leaked. So there I am, just put the fan back on, just so that you guys can kind of see how everything goes together. Put the belt on, put a new belt on. When you got it apart like this, it's a good time to replace things. Radiators back in, bolting everything up, like the hydraulic cooler lines on the bottom, that fan shroud, everything's got to go in within, like, you know, a sequence. So at this point, I pretty much got everything bolted back up. Just going over some things. I need to prime the fuel system first before we can crank it over and test the injectors. Yeah. So one of the things you got to do after you prime the fuel system is crank it over and bleed the injectors off before you can really start it up. So if you look closely, you can see the injectors purge diesel. Moment of truth. Yep. So here I am just driving around the yard, making sure everything's good, nothing's leaking. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, post them below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.